So hello everyone. So it is our great honor to have Chris Demchak to our seminar. Her bio in our homepage is very short, but actually her list is very, very long. I want to tell you something. So she is active actually, I think more than 35 years, right? She has active actually in the cyber security, but policy and strategic development. And she shows a lot of things about especially cyber war and the strategy and policy about the cyber security. And I want to actually highlight very, very important thing for all of us is most of us are from computer science, but the cyber security is much, much beyond the computer science technical part. And her view is very special and unique for us to have a big view, a much, much bigger view about cyber security, cyber war, and everything. So, and by the way, and the Chris didn't show her record, but if you check, in 30 years ago, she is already the MacArthur Fellow. So, Chris, you are amazing actually the scholar, and I don't want to spend too much time to introduce her achievement. And we want to warmly welcome the Chris to share his opinion about cyber power actually across consolidated democracy. So it's our pleasure to have you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's get started. Let me, I only have 110 slides, so this ought to be pretty quick. I'm going to make you an argument today about why we need robust cyber power amongst consolidated democracies. And I hope that I can make this I will make this within 30 minutes. That's how it's going to happen. What I'm going to argue is that the problem, a good part of the problem that we have today began with the way we built the internet from the beginning. And this argument has 4 parts. I'm going to argue that it was built badly, and it was built badly due to naivete, to greed, and to hubris. Secondly, that what we created was a very shoddy substrate. And of course, it's been fully exploited by adversaries, right? And creating something that we would call I call great systems conflict. And thirdly, that this then has changed the future survival options for the minority community of consolidated democracies. We're weird anyway, we're strange. The rest of the world isn't quite like us, and it doesn't make us better, it just makes us weird. And so we need a new narrative. The 4th point, and that narrative needs to be a collective operational way for us to have democratic cyber power. And I'm going to give you an example of what I think we should be doing there. So number 1, poor cyber parenting. All right, we built this, and we built it badly. We basically built it in such a way that we facilitated offense, losses, and conflict as it spread across the global system. This is what we thought we were building, peace, love, and eternal prosperity. And this is what we got, right? Conflict, thievery. We did not get the global village. These are words we used at the time in the 90s, a global village. We didn't get any universal prosperity. We didn't get an open, free, safe, democratizing internet. We assumed that if anyone connected to the internet, they would automatically democratize. This, of course, never happened, right? And furthermore, this substrate, the way we created it, actually creates conflict. Sloppy code is everywhere. Why? Well, in part because in the early developers in the 1990s, they chose fault-tolerant languages because they were quick, they were cheap. You could put what we called software factories together, and they were protected from responsibility by our own naivete. We said these things. If a government or anyone regulates the internet or any of the people that work on it, then it will die. We believed this too. So ignorance, hubris, and missing laws allowed them to use this fault-tolerant languages and basically make it possible to hack. And what did they give the hackers? 5 offense advantages that had never been seen in history, except for emperors or close neighbors. If you're an emperor or a close neighbor, then you can figure out, if you're an emperor, you have the money. You can have any scale of organization. You can be any distance from an adversary or a target. You can buy all the weapons that you can get your hands on. You don't need to hide what you use, and you don't need to hide who you are. Now, with this shoddy substrate, anyone with access to the internet and some time and a little skill, maybe not too much, can have any scale of organization they like using a botnet. They can be 5 to 5,000 kilometers away from a target and get what used to be considered high quality intelligence about them. They can pick a wide variety of weapons with a certain amount of precision to do this or do that. They can hide those tools when they use them, and they can hide themselves when they do it. This changes the nature of conflict, right? And what is the consequence for us in democracies and consolidated democracies? Cyber insecurity, losses estimated to be 1 to 2% of the GDP. It is not sustainable. And this, by the way, is before COVID. It also accelerated, it didn't make the movement, but it accelerated the movement of the global center of economic power away from the democracies to Asia, and specifically to China, right? And it created this natural tension, this cybered conflict worldwide. Now, these conflicts ride on this shoddy construction, but they have a ripple effect through the society. And here's a model of what this does. So here are your 5 offense advantages, and they ripple through the sources of systemic surprise. Every society has them. Every society is a socio-technical economic system, but particularly now because it's been integrated using the shoddy substrate. Every society has single enterprises that are complex, and they have surprises they have to deal with. Every society now has joint large enterprises. That means they work across their particular domain or industry, and they're integrated. But now we have another layer, another source of systemic surprise, and that is the world's mass, that tsunami of bad actors, able to use these 5 offense advantages against anyone in any society they can reach into. And of them, we also have 5–10%, the top of the very smart ones. They're scary smart. Call them the wicked actors. Comes from the mathematical notion of wicked problems, right? Other people call them wizards. These people don't work for themselves. They always work for a transnational criminal organization or a state. And the consequences of having now 2 more sources of systemic surprise is that states tend to have weak systemic resilience when they're digitized and weak forward defense. Consequences? They are weak cyber powers. Cyber power rests on not just whether or not you can throw it out, but can you take it and defend against it? And this leaves governments with trying to figure out what to do. When they have to figure out what to do, they have to reach back into cyberspace somewhere. And as Dan Kuhl has pointed out, there are 3 things you reach in. You touch the connectivity, you touch the content, or you touch the cognition. Now for democracies, they don't want to touch the cognition. That's what you think. They don't want to touch the content. That's free speech. So they're left with connectivity. And that is mostly owned by the private sector. And so what we have is the democracies at the moment have this vicious cycle going on where they end up with 1 to 2% of their GDP in losses as a function of this. Now, to the second point. Adversaries of democracies are going to use this. This should not come as anyone's surprise. Nowhere along the way should it come as anyone's surprise. But helping them along is the fact that the vast majority of people who use the substrate have no idea how it's built. They don't understand that it's entirely peer or pay, that every piece of traffic only moves along the internet because a recipient server somewhere either has a contract by which you pay them to take your traffic, or they've agreed as a peer that they'll just pass it along, right? 95% of it travels on undersea cables as well. And so let's look at it for a quick minute. This is you, me, we're internet users. This is all we tend to pay attention to. Goes out to some server. And we sign up, we put a little modem in, you understand that? That's called the third tier. And that then goes into servers that are in server exchanges. And every server in there has a contract or a peering relationship. It's not there by accident. And that's the tier 2, sometimes called the IP backbone. And these servers are called points of presence. I'm going to make a point about this, so I'm highlighting them to you. And as the traffic goes up, it then hits the tier 1 networks. That's your Verizons. They're massive, and they deal with each other as peers. It's too big to charge money. So they just agree they're going to travel, they're going to move the traffic along. And what that means is that it makes it worth your while to move the traffic up to the tier 1 and then down. That's a cheaper path. If someone is not doing that, they've chosen a more expensive path. And this all is run by what we call the Border Gateway Protocol routing table. And many of you are in computer science, and you probably know all about this. What I'm going to talk about is if you as a government or you as a people don't understand how the internet is constructed, then someone can exploit that, and they can exploit your BGP against you. So let me show you a quick piece of research I did with Dr. Yuval Shavit. We published this in 2018. This is called BGP hijacking. And we noticed something odd about the points of presence that were being run by China Telecom in North America. There's 10 of them at the time in North America. And this is what we noticed. So we noticed traffic, particularly Yuval noticed traffic that's supposed to come from one place, in this case, Scandinavia to Japan, is a nice clean straight path. When that traffic would hit a China Telecom POP here in Scandinavia, it would travel from China Telecom POP to POP to POP, would go through China, wander around in China, and then come to Japan. This wasn't a misconfiguration. This went on for some time. Now, in this case, it was a news network. We noticed another one. This was a government-to-government communication. And it started in Japan, should have gone to Singapore, and then UAE. No particular problem here. What happened is it hit the China Telecom POP. It went to another China Telecom POP in California. It then went into China and then went to UAE. And this was a pattern. It wasn't a misconfiguration. Someone was hijacking the traffic for what it should. So this is what it should have done. This was a large bank, travel Italy from Houston. And instead, it hit the China Telecom POP in the United States, went to the next China Telecom POP, and went to China and never made it. Now, that was the stuff we published in 2018. I asked Yuval, and we started outside of the United States. Does it also happen there? He started finding, of course, he found that, for example, in Africa, what we have is an arrangement between China Telecom and their Russian partner, Trans Telecom, and traffic that has no reason to travel through Moscow will hit the China Telecom POPs, go to the China Telecom POP in Moscow, then go to the China Telecom POP in Germany, and finally end up where it was intended to go. It's another example of this. Starts in Israel. It's meant for Milan, should have gone over here and hit to Milan. Instead, it gets diverted through these POPs through Moscow. This doesn't happen just once. It's not a misconfiguration. These are people using the fact that the defenders don't understand the system that they're defending. Now, today, yeah.
We're losing a little bit of your audio. Let's try turning your camera off, and maybe that'll send some bandwidth to the audio side until you're through your slides, please.
All done. Okay. So today, we have to recognize that this is a place of competition moving to conflict, because of the losses. Right? But China is a major player. And China's rise is built on a strategically coherent view of the world. China is focused on dominating what I call cyber's offspring, machine and quantum. It graduates more computer scientists per year than the US does in all of STEM. It has a reverse stream of highly skilled Western educated cyber experts. They're offered huge labs. Who would say no? And of course, it's laying ownership lines and indirect control lines all over the developing world. It makes it much easier to engage in these kinds of behaviors and to use these 5 offensive advantages. And Xi Jinping's been quite clear. He's rejecting Western civil society values and views this as a return to a rightful place due to demographic scale at the apex of cyber power as well, and all the other powers. The thing we have to remember in the West is this actually resonates with a good part of the world, that we are the weird ones, they are not. And therefore, this is a problem, our own survival over time. And why are we surprised? Why does anyone be surprised? In fact, throughout history, China has been the major GDP. So it shouldn't come as any great surprise. It's not demonizing China, it's recognizing a reality that others should have recognized for some time. But what has surprised us, and it's what made us difficult to figure out what to do, is how fast it happened. The Chinese themselves anticipated that they would reach the same GDP as the US by 2049. In fact, by the measures of PPP for GDP, which is purchasing parity, they did it already in 2014. And they were 20% ahead of the US by 2019. And this was before COVID, before the pandemic. Right? And furthermore, as they spread out, they take with them their preferences, and they will have the ability to change internet protocol over time. Why? Sheer scale. They will simply be there. That's what you face. If that's okay, you like the way that those preferences get executed, then this is different. When China is the central business node, Chinese preferences will be built into the technologies they set out. And this is already happening. For example, I draw your attention to the smart city initiatives. These are facial surveillance systems that are being sold to local governments. Not only do the Chinese who run them get the data, but of course, so do the local government. And they're being used against dissent or even political opposition already. So these things are worth paying attention to. Baidu is, of course, their equivalent of on the GPS, and it is circulating around the world, particularly located above capitals of every country for whatever reasons. And although China Telecom is having difficulty in the United States and North America with its 10 POPs across 23 countries, they have over 2,500 POPs around the world. So the kinds of things that we can see now can go on at any time, right? There are no Western POPs in China, by the way. That means number 3, the future is coming fast, and it really isn't in the favor of the minority community of consolidated democracies in this digital world. Because of the way we built the internet, because of its offensive advantages, we've stepped into a conflict that is throughout our systems. It's what I call a great systems conflict. China has the opportunity and will, when it is the largest digital economy, that is inevitable. It will alter the global international economic system. In 2006, only one Chinese firm, a large telecommunications firm, Huawei, and it has a checkered past and haven't got there, but nonetheless, there it is. And by 2014, 4 of the 7 are Chinese. By 2020, Huawei is already the largest telecommunications vendor in the entire world, and the Chinese firms are distributed throughout the world. They actually operate differently in Africa than they do in the Middle East and Asia in one particular way. In Africa, they're very likely to offer to install a system, maintain a system, upgrade it, and innovate with it practically for free. Whereas in the Middle East and in Asia, they charge it as a loan. Very strategic. In 2020, the Chinese government began to say, we want a new internet infrastructure. And it's been working through the UN, through the ITU, which is strongly supported as the cyberspace standards making body in the world. Though it isn't technically yet. It doesn't have that kind of control yet, but they're certainly pushing it. And they want a fundamental internet redesign, not as the one I'm going to recommend. But in this redesign, every individual will have to register, every individual in the world will have to register using their name to use the internet, and authorities can shut off that individual's access at any time. This is a fundamental problem with the values of the democratic consolidated democracies. That is a fundamental problem. Right? And it gets worse at the moment. Remember this picture, nice and clear, little layers, everything. This is the kind of work that Yuval and I can do. We can trace these BGP hijacking, but this is the world that's coming. It's a world of clouds, and they're commercial clouds, still peer or pay. But what goes on inside a commercial cloud, they have no obligation to reveal to researchers such as myself, to the government, or to anyone else. The commercial clouds, when you are in Google land, Google can basically program that Google land to do whatever Google wants it and hire anyone it wants at any level of security it would like. And this is opaque to the rest of us. So it's doubling down on a problem of people don't understand the system. The international submarine cable network is complexifying. Where does it come up? Where is international cyberspace anymore? Note that every cable comes up on somebody's sovereign territory. So is international in between over here when it hits the first server? And what we've seen over the last 25 years is a growing sense of borders in cyberspace. My cyberspace. We're seeing cyber strategies say, this is mine. I will defend mine. And so we're seeing these little, if you will, cyber kingdoms really shown. That's extraordinarily difficult. Right? And in the old days, the stacks were relatively non-complex either. But even the stacks are complexifying. Right? Here, now we have an enormous amount of connected devices. We have cloud computing. And just to throw it in, I have put in the AI stack, which is adding machine learning, data management. We are dealing with the world that is doubling down on that insecure substrate on which we built it to begin with. Right? So it's going to matter who owns, upgrades, maintains these stacks inside the democracies. It's going to matter who does it for the entire global socio-technical economic system. Right? And the future democracies will depend on how well China is able to capitalize on its scale, its strategic coherence, which is pretty impressive, in order to dictate the governance, the resource flows, the technological advantages, and the profit-taking rules that will, if nothing else happens, also govern the choices for consolidated democracies. So the final point. Democracies, the consolidated democracies are a minority community. It's never been a whole boatload of them, right? We need to find a way amongst ourselves to have the scale and the strategic operational coherence to ensure an acceptable future for the democratic model in this digitized world, right? So we need a new narrative, and this narrative has to be collective and it has to be inclusive. So the first one is we have to scale up. We have, by a conservative count, over 900 million person market. And these are a market across with common democratic values. This includes our private sector. So we need an integrated whole of society defense with our allies, with their private sectors, with their telecommunications, our IT capital goods sectors, right? It's going to have to, it will definitely have to be a federalized system, but nonetheless, it has to include the private sector. And we have to buy time. This is happening so fast. We have so many people who still don't understand how it's constructed. We have to actively defend our critical forms of democratic IT with the private sector. Right? This is a key to shared resilience strategies, but specifically as clouds grow. It does not mean we don't trade. Of course we trade, but it does mean that we defend within the consolidated democracies. Right? And finally, and importantly, we have to transform the technology. That we have to invest massively. I call it a wartime tempo. Wartime tempo of investment in advanced technologies like AI, advanced IT, for the long-term defense of our own economic and security well-being. We have to reconstruct the current cyberspace within the established democracies. Start small, work with what we are, and make it what we meant it to be: safe, innovative, generative, democratic internet. Own house. And when we do that with the rest of the world, when it works, and say, look, see, you can work in a digitized world. You can be a prosperous and secure democracy in a digitized world, and provide a successful counter narrative to the China model. I argue that will actually reduce the tension, because peers deal with peers differently. If you are a rising power and you see the other as declining and not going to be a peer for long, you're more aggressive, right? And we have countries like Denmark, 10 million people, having a chance. So peers deal with peers differently. That's what this is part of it. That's what this is about. That, what I call it, is the Cyber Operational Resilience Alliance, a CORA. That's how it works. We start with the governments, right? Governments work with their private sector. They're what I would call anchor institutions. They're working with their telecommunications on the connectivity. We are not trying to control the content or the cognition, because we're democracies. They're also working with our IT capital goods industry. This is the wartime tempo R&D. And the focus is in this reconstructing the internet is to reduce the 5 offense advantages. Consequences rolls through these 4 sources of systemic surprise. Now we have the possibility for systemic resilience, and also the ability, when it's legal, for forward defense. And that makes cyber powers. And that makes collective cyber powers. And I call them CORA allied nations. And there's a robust cyber power that is shared across the democracies, and then can be shared as a model for the rest of the world. Trust me, there is no assured future for democracy in a deeply cybered, authoritarian leaning world, great systems conflict. If we do not hang together, I love Ben Franklin, so if we do not hang together internally and across allies, we will most certainly hang separately. So, there you are. I'm happy to answer questions and fill in holes wherever I can.
So hello everyone. So if you want to ask a question, could you use the Q&A? So Chris, and the student post a question in the Q&A. Can you say that, or you want me to read the question for you?
I'm turning. Hang on a minute. I just turned off
at the bottom of
chart.
the Zoom. Can you say Q&A and then
I see it.
Can you say that? Yeah.
Yes. Do you want to turn on my video again as I'm answering and I'm not
yeah,
sharing?
Please. I think please turn on your video. We want to see you. I think the current network is good. Awesome.
Okay, I see chat. Okay, but there aren't questions, they're just comments. So let's go, where am I going? Q&A, all right. Okay, CORA is a concept, but it's a concept that I argue is already being built in pieces. I am, in fact, in the process right now of creating the database of the private sector organizations that would naturally fit into a CORA. And across the consolidated democracies, we see the rise of things like NCSCs, National Cybersecurity Centers. One of the ideal types that show is the UK's NCSC. Another model of an NCSC equivalent is the Israeli Cyber Directorate as well. But you see countries realize they need a whole of society response, and that whole of society response interacts directly with their private sector. And I'm trying to pull all of that together, all those interim pieces together, going, look, we don't have to start with a tabula rasa, with nothing, an empty table. We've got stuff already there. So that's my answer. Next one. Okay, so what do I think the advent of Web3 will change the landscape? So much is going to change the landscape, but I don't see it at the moment as changing the landscape necessarily in the direction of better security for the entire system, unless we consciously.
Okay.
Hey, staff. So wherever, Web3. The difficulty is people have to be aware that this is a problem. For example, if you read the literature today on AI, artificial intelligence, right? ML, AI, you know that you're computer scientists. So it sounds like it's unrelated to cyberspace. It's like, oh, here is AI. Isn't it lovely? It is beautiful. It's going to solve everything for you. And because I was a baby professor in the 90s, reading all this about the internet, I cannot help but see exactly the same naive optimism, hubris going into AI, not because AI can't do many of the things eventually that people want it to do. They don't know how to defend it. Last January of 2021, at the Enigma conference, this Microsoft engineer gave this wonderful talk about defending AI. And what he pointed out is that Microsoft had done this back of the envelope survey of 28 ML firms. And of the 28 ML firms, 25 of them had no idea how to defend their ML algorithms. They had no idea. They didn't even think about it. It wasn't a thought. I've had another conversation with a colleague who works at DARPA, and this is a program manager for some AI programs. Smart person, very thoughtful, very involved, absolutely on top of the game. The word security doesn't occur to her. It doesn't. It's not there yet. So we've got answers not applied to fundamental problems. And the fundamental problems are what's leading to the conflict, the heightened tensions, and everything else. I hope that answers the question. How has the CORA concept been received by the national defense community? Well, fire once, fire twice, keep firing, and then they finally respond. What is happening is people are interested in having a collective response. What we are seeing, this is why I'm taking the time to find the private sectors. I've already published once on this as a concept, but now I'm finishing a manuscript that has the data to say, look, you don't have to start all over. The defense community in general is in favor of alliances. They see them as a way to save burden, to be better prepared and buffered. The kind of language you hear about collective defense, though, is of the word alliance, not operational alliance. That's my distinction. And so they're happy to go have meetings and talk about it. And then we'll think. I don't think there's a rejection of any of this. I just think it's desperately incomplete. that if you're not going to build the institutions in order to actually do something, then we are not going to be advancing the problem or solving the problem in the future. I hope that answered the question. Oh, I scared him. Election integrity. Let's see, so what are my thoughts on election integrity, hardware, software, voter trafficking not being investigated, taken serious, cyber threat? Well, my good colleague David Mussington says would probably beg to differ on the whether it was taken seriously. I guess that question would be who didn't take it seriously. It was certainly clear that General Nakasone took it quite seriously during the 2020 election. There was an enormous amount of stuff that went on behind the scenes. Now, in general, however, the US has a major problem that comes from the fact, as an old professor of mine, it was a sociology professor once who said, I guess it's at Princeton, rest in peace, said, you know, there's no problem the United States has that isn't directly related somehow to the fact we got 50 states. So we have 50 little sovereignties, and the 50 little sovereignties were instructed by their own state constitutions and our constitutions to have elections, have an election. And that means they can set them up if they like. And so part of the difficulty on vote election integrity is, unlike most consolidated democracies, we don't have a federal or a central government control over the quality of those elections, and that becomes a problem of election integrity. I am neither for nor against electronic voting. I am profoundly suspicious of electronic voting machines that are provided by monopolistically by one or one other firm that then simply claims proprietary interests, and therefore you can't open up and see what it's doing. And then, of course, there's the problem of the 50 states, and they've never had this digital threat to voter registration lists, for example. Who cares? Who would ever attack that? If I had just a little bit of Bitcoin for every time someone has told me over the last 25 years, who would want to attack that? I would be buying you all dinner. I would be very wealthy. It's astounding how often the lack of attention to this problem comes from sheer ignorance. Sheer ignorance. They can't imagine it. And then when it happens, they're horrified, shocked, whatever, but they can't imagine. This is why we have to rebuild it. We can't expect the random individual to spend their time going, well, I wonder if that's a compromise of my server, that one, no, we have to rebuild it. I will quote a German security official told me about 10 years ago. He just shrugged his hand and went, the user is useless. You have to go around them. Yeah.
Chris, and I also have one question. I realize as a panelist, I cannot type a question. So can I ask one question?
Oh, please.
Yeah. So we know internet is one internet, because for the whole globe, we want to have one internet, right? But in your slides, you also mentioned, actually right now, this kind of one global internet kind of dispel is because in the physical world, every nation will have their bond and have their politics. We know, unfortunately, this is kind of true. So we definitely can say the politics, the policy impact actually the internet, or we can say impact our cyber world. We know it's hard to change in a short period, but I still want you to comment a little bit about what will be the trend and or future, and especially from the technical side or policy side, what we can do for open internet or for whatever, or how we deal with this kind of a situation, which will happen in the coming years. Yeah.
So one of the discussions that's come up is, how many internets will we have in the future? And some people say, oh, we'll have two. No, we'll have three. And I'm like, so as long as countries are feeling threatened and they are then told, if you filter this, you hold this, you control that, they're going to put in policies, extent that they can, technologies to either filter or control or tamp down. We know already smaller countries that have decided that they're having dissent in their country, and they shut down the internet. They go, why? Because they have several major servers and exchanges, and they don't literally unplug it, but they go and they will shut it down so that people can't use it. And meant by countries exercising sovereignty, so that the internet as we know it never really quite existed like we thought it did. But the hubris of the westernized nations was because it was free for us, then it was free for everyone. And that meant it a global internet. It's not going to stay, it's not going to be united. It will transmit. Even in the height of war, people were, during World War II, they were sending messages over telegraphs that were buried, telegraph cables that were buried under the sea. So communications will go on in one way or the other. The question is, at what point are those filters put in, and who's able to do that? Who's made a policy and has the technical capability to do it? Now, there are those who argue that if we just encrypted everything, then we could share anything, and nobody could filter, no one could stop anything, and it would, do what we needed to do. But the difficulty with that is encryption itself, leaving aside that how that's ever going to happen. But it's the encryption itself. One of my bedside tables is a book called The Coming Encryption Apocalypse. And of course, it's about how quantum is going to make what we have as encryption today very difficult. And so, or break it open. So I look at this, and my response is, I'm arguing that for the democracies, because that's a value we have, for us, we have to figure out how to have a secure and open internet. And then we have to figure out how we help others with that model. The Chinese model is country by country, my internet, your internet, and then we communicate. So many countries will pick that model because, at least till recently, for example, for Africans, it came practically free. And they're going to pick it because if you want to control your population, that's a good way to do it, right? Will they then say, oh, I want an open, free internet, say, across the continent of Africa? Maybe. And then anyway, what will happen is at some point, there will always be some level of traffic that just travels.
Oh, yeah.
I don't to that very much. I just say, list us, that's our value system, then we need to find the technical way to make that happen, and securely.
Yes.
For other countries, and that's the other 80% of the world, those decisions are going to have to be made as they go forward. Let's see the next question.
So we have three internet.
Do you have any?
Okay, yes, we have more questions. Okay. Yeah, we have one more.
Let me finish with one other. Let me sort of share more story though about that. This was about 2008 or 9, and I'm at a conference, and there's a representative of one of our major telecommunications corporations standing there with his drink in his hand, and he's kind of rocking back on his heels, and he's saying to these 3 government people who were standing there, who had no idea what the internet looked like. He's saying, well, we at Mega Corporation X, we don't care about national boundaries. We're a global corporation. We kind of do what we want. I couldn't stand it. So I go into the conversation and I say, well, actually that's just not true, because you, Mega Corporation, Germany has employee laws, tax laws, health laws, and all that. And when you make a corporation, you put your whatever your outlet is in Germany, you have to abide by health laws, tax laws, employee laws, and all that. And when Germany makes cyber laws, you'll have to abide by those too. And he was like, oh, yeah. So that's
I really appreciate your answer. Actually, this is why policy is more complex than the computer science. And we have 2 more questions as a Q&A. Would you want to take a look? And
okay.
2 more questions.
Globally or overarching antitrust laws that can regulate the influence of big tech on the internet. Well, no, but what we have that's having an effect that people predicted and other people resisted, and I see the next question is already asked, is asking it, GDPR. So GDPR is beginning to be one of those little standards. I meet GDPR rules, right? Because they made it hurt if you don't. If you don't want to do any business in Europe, in the EU, who cares? But if you do, then you have to make a whole special arrangement for GDPR, or you risk, and I believe it is, what, 4% of your global revenue as a fine? So that hurts. That's where even Facebook actually put a whole bunch of money into a special pot because it knew it was going to violate GDPR. It was enough money at the time to percent of the global revenue. So no, we don't ones, but what we have are these standards that are beginning to creep up because they're the only ones there, and they are hosted by a large economic actor, right? The EU is a huge economic actor. You want to sell or something in the EU, you got to pay attention to them. Now, will we ever have those? You know, one of the problems with the decline of the Western liberal westernized system is that the UN had a lot more clout than it does now. So I don't know where that's going to go. So I don't know if that's going to be overarching. Maybe bilateral always, you know, you, me, I don't know. The expansion strategy sit with the GDPR. I think the GDPR is sufficiently flexible to accommodate this. I believe it is. I know that the lawyers that deal with it will spend a great deal of time discussing it, and months will go by as they duke around with it. But I think that it could flexibly handle this. Yes, I hope so. Anyway, in fact, I wouldn't mind if we had a few of the GDPR rules in this country. But there you are.
It will be a lot of discussion, and we may not can answer this one today. And if you know more question, I think right now it's perfect timing, Chris. So I think, you know, thank you so much for coming to us and to give this very nice talk. I think this opens a new view for different brush, fresh view for us to look at the problem, especially from the policy. And this is very important perspective to look into our cyber, right? Cyber war, cyber security. And we are so happy to have you, and thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Can I make one last comment? That is the plea to all the computers there, all the computer scientists in here. So you're going to go out and you're going to get a job, you're going to work for a corporation, and my plea to you is that keep your job. But while you're keeping your job, try to insert the concepts of security into whatever you're building, and, you know, be open to the ideas that you might, you know, can make that a little more secure right there. You know, because the corporate finance guys don't want to hear it. We know that, but it has to be you. They won't listen, and only the technical guys can make it happen. So just my plea.
Oh, nice, clean. Thank you so much to deliver this message. I think most of actually the computer science students, and they will need that. Thank you very much. And I think
Okay.
The timing is perfect. So thank you very much for coming today, and then hope we can see you soon at the same place. Hope COVID is right. And thank you for everyone to come in today's talk, and looking forward to see others actually next Wednesday. Bye. Have a good day.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
everybody.